at the time I was eating meat. So I said, okay, well, I don't eat red meat. I can eat chicken. Like, let's just stick to one. And then I reduced the amount of chicken. And then I was saying, okay, now go vegetarian. And then I was like, okay, well, what's the bigger issue? Then I educated myself more on dairy, like cheese, yogurt, and milk, and challenged myself again to cut off one and one. And so I did reductionism because that's what really helped me to become a long-term sustainable vegan.
I'm your host, Adam Met, and today we're chatting with Isaias Hernandez, also known online as Queer Brown Vegan. Isaias started Queer Brown Vegan, an educational blog and social media account, just after graduating from Berkeley's environmental science program. Many of their classmates studied sustainability from a white Western perspective, so Isaias created this online space to show that environmental and human rights are inseparable. We talk about going vegan, promoting sustainable agriculture, and building a climate-conscious community. A quick reminder that we're planting a tree for every person who subscribes to this podcast, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, here is Isaias Hernandez on Planet Reimagined. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to talk to you. We're going to hit so many different topics, from social media to communication to identity to veganism to zero waste. And I really appreciate you being here today. Great to meet you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much again, Adam, for having me.
Amazing. Okay, so I want to start by giving the audience a little bit of kind of grounding on who you are. So I want to start by talking about identity. And I'd love to just dive right in. How has your queer identity intersected with your obvious passion for environmentalism?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for asking that question. So, as a queer person of color myself, my identity really intersects with the work I do, mainly because I mainly advocate for frontline communities. And when we talk about frontline communities and characteristics of who exactly are these people, queer and trans people are one of the most vulnerable groups to be affected by the climate crisis. And so my identity in understanding how my queerness has always been seen as not normal or presented in a way that is you're mentally ill, I really fought those harmful rhetoric and to truly reclaim what it means to be queer, right? To be free, to be fluid, but to be very harmonious in nature. And we've seen this with ecological practices, especially with different species being animal species, right? There's different relationships that animals have with their own kingdom and with different interwebs of connections. And so that is one of the really main aspects, is that I want people to understand that queerness isn't just about the rainbow flag. It's more about being able to live in this multidimensional issue world that we live in order to really be a better advocate for not just ourselves, but our communities, and to reaffirm the ideas that if we are talking about disaster relief programs, that we also include queer and trans communities that often are displaced by climate events, and making sure that they don't face either violence when entering the refugee camps, and that they have the equitable resources that they need to survive.
That's incredible. And this kind of goes into the next thing I want to talk about, which is your incredible platform that you've built, which is Queer Brown Vegan. And for anyone who hasn't checked that out on Instagram, go check it out. It's an amazing platform for communicating about environmentalism in a pretty unique way. And it's grown tremendously over the last year. And on social media, it's always so interesting to see public educators like yourself develop unique ways of communicating with their audience. And so I'm curious, kind of building off of the last thing we were talking about, why was it important to tie your identity to the title of this platform?
Yeah, I think it was the most important thing for me to tie into my platform because I didn't want to hide who I was. Many of the times when I was in academic spaces in undergrad, I always hid my sexuality with professors or graduate students because, you're only talking about science. You don't want other things to be mentioned. But then I realized how much of a disservice I was doing to myself because I met other queer undergraduate students that were doing research. I met other future students of color feeling embarrassed to enter the environmental field because of their identity. And so I didn't want people to ever feel ashamed that if you want to enter this environmental field through a research side, that you don't need to always be straight or just, different values, right? Everyone comes in different colors and identities. And so part about being queer for me is to really represent for LGBT youth out there to not feel ashamed of who they are and to really own who they are.
That's incredible. And you brought up school as one of these places where you felt that you needed to hide yourself. So my next question is, so much of academia and a lot of, health experts, agriculture experts would say, oh, you just went to undergrad. You got an undergrad education. That's not enough for you to be an expert in this. And yet you've created a platform where you're communicating these things to a much larger audience than any of these so-called experts would ever be able to reach. So my question is, when you have such a level of expertise in something like this, how do you figure out the right way to communicate it to a wider audience so they don't get bogged down in so much of the details that they can't really take action on?
Yeah, I really love that. One thing that I always emphasize in my community is to respect indigenous wisdom and knowledge as science, and to also honor your lived experiences as part of that science. Because the reason that I noticed that when I was in academia, I either had two types of educators or multiple. One was the educator that was very intelligent in the system itself, but did not know how to communicate it to people. And so this is where I would get confused too, as an educator myself, trying to understand what they were trying to say, and then also reading the research that I was forced to do as an undergrad. The other part is number two is the people that necessarily are not wanting to challenge themselves to understand that many of these systems are interconnected. And so what I present in my community is a very intro level into those topics, so then they could start to understand and start to be more curious on the subject. Because the more and more that people are introduced to subjects, they're more willing to be curious, they're more willing to ask questions, and they're more willing to either be wrong and to learn. And so that is one of the most important phases in many people's systems online, is that they want to learn. And because it's not a traditional classroom setting, they're more likely to open up. They're more likely to say what's on their mind rather than being in front of the professor and being scared that they may be marked down or made look fun of their peers. And they're willing to do that with me. And I think that's part of a reason that I wanted to really stray away from academia a bit and to bring these localized systems, because at the same time, I do not think that you need to pay thousands of dollars for an institution to teach you this, when it should really be available for everyone, regardless of who you are.
Sure. And my favorite thing about what you just said is that people should not be afraid to be wrong. And also, I would add to that that people should not be afraid to say, I don't know. It's kind of become a taboo thing, which is very strange to me. But when people have the confidence to say, I don't know the answer to that, I tend to respect them so much more than somebody who would just say, oh, yeah, and make up an answer. Because so much of what we see in especially in our political world today is people just making up answers to things that they know nothing about. So the fact that you created this community where people are feeling comfortable to actually ask the questions and say, I'm not sure about this, please help me learn this, is really incredible.
Definitely. And I really love the idea of just pushing the I don't know, because that shows that you're willing to unlearn and relearn. And there's different stages of our learning. And there's no such person that I've ever met in my academic life that was always right. They've either made mistakes on their formulas or mistakes on the paper. I've made mistakes on my data. Like a lot of, like, it's normal. And I think that's one of the things we need to normalize, that it's okay to make mistakes or you don't know things.
Absolutely. Okay, I want to dive into a few more kind of technical subjects. So you are zero waste, or at least attempting to be fully zero waste, and you are vegan. Now, to a lot of the people listening, to take those steps might be a complete 180-degree shift in their lives. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your first steps towards being zero waste and being vegan, and if there are any things that you can suggest for people to take small steps if they can't get there in one big leap.
Yeah, I absolutely love those questions. So the very first story I will share is veganism, because I transitioned to veganism first. One thing that is free out there is education, right? There's so much more resources to find out about our globalized food systems, and primarily a lot of the meat that we source comes primarily from industrial meat. Yes, there's local farms that do exist, but a lot of us, even myself, when I used to eat meat, would source it just from the industrial and in the grocery store. And, I have it. I tell people that in understanding the history of things, it challenges them to really understand, like, where do I see myself in this movement? Because you're not asking anyone to buy products yet. You're not asking anyone to change yourself. You're just saying, here is this information, and let's discuss. I took an agricultural and food systems course in college, and I learned about industrial agriculture. And I learned about already that it's not the best conditions, and it's really not good for the environment. But we delve deeper into those subjects of, like, okay, well, what exactly happens to the animals? The animals are forcefully impregnated, they're slaughtered. Undocumented farm workers have to work there illegally, having to get paid less than minimum wage, no access to workers' unions. They have to fear deportation, and they receive a lot of physical inability movements through all those mechanized machinery that they have to use. And so this really broke my heart. And then you go deeper into the environmental impact, the waterway streams being infected, air pollution being affected, and then low-income communities of color being poisoned by this air, and they're not able to do anything. And so then this becomes a humans and animal rights issue already. And so I tell people that this is one of the reasons that I stopped eating meat, is that, not to say I wanted to make a big difference, but this is a step that I said, okay, well, what is feasible for me to do? At the time I was eating meat, so I said, okay, well, I don't eat red meat. I can eat chicken. Like, let's just stick to one. And then I reduced the amount of chicken. And then I was saying, okay, now I'll go vegetarian. And then I was like, okay, well, what's the bigger issue? Then I educated myself more on dairy, like cheese, yogurt, and milk, and challenged myself again to cut off one and one. And so I did reductionism, because that's what really helped me to become a long-term sustainable vegan. And I think one of the issues that I see in veganism is that the phrase "go vegan" can sometimes be sometimes problematic, sometimes hard to deconstruct. And so I tell people, before we say that, I will add disclaimers. So first, let's just educate ourselves about it. Two, I always advocate for people to reduce. And number three is that, yes, once you go vegan, start to look into ways of how you can support animal sanctuaries, policies like our taxes that go into subsidies for these food, providing low-income communities of color healthier types of food, because local donations of churches, they give out a lot of meat and dairy, and there's less fruits and vegetables. And, like, why is that? Like, we need to start asking questions about that. When it came to zero waste, I learned first about it as college, of like, oh, you're just recycling. Like, I did that growing up. As a low-income person of color, my family and I recycled cans in Los Angeles. I didn't really see it as sustainability. I was just saying, hey, this is how we make money, and that's how a lot of street vendors do it. Like, let's go, But when I learned more about zero waste, the definition for me came out from the Zero Waste International Alliance. It said that, yes, products to be consciously designed to fit the environment, which meant, like, plastic free or different types. But it also said that the corporations that are creating these types of products do not have a negative discharge to the land and to the communities, most specifically people of color. And so that's when I started to frame it through as an environmental justice lens. Is like, zero waste is both an animal and humans' right issue, because one, plastic pollution is destroying ecosystems or animals. It's also killing the people who are protecting these ecosystems, like indigenous communities. And so in the efforts of me asking myself, okay, like, where can I start? I looked into my own lifestyle: bathroom, kitchen, living room. What is the most easiest thing to do? Bathroom, right? I don't eat my bathroom products. Probably the most easiest thing to do. Next thing is living room. I don't eat my living room products. Number three is the kitchen, right? Ideally, I still use plastic every day. Unfortunately, I don't have the option to really opt out. And so for me, told myself, okay, well, it's really fun to do this lifestyle changes. And I think it's a really great challenge for people. But how can I get people to understand that this is a human's right issue? How do we understand that plastic pollution, yes, is killing our ecosystem, but it's killing our people of color? And so in doing that, I, learned more about documentaries about like, the story of plastic. There's a really great documentary that came out a year ago about plastic pollution. And so I really told myself that in these two different these systems almost seem different, but in reality they're interconnected. At the end of the day, we're all fighting for a better future, which is our planet. And that recognizes that one system is very bad, which is the petrochemical industry, and the other system is the industrial agriculture industry, which is really unethical and really unsustainable. And so in trying to determine these two things, I think it wasn't really something that it took me years to understand, yes, and I'm still understanding it, but it realized to me that at the end of the day, making these changes never made me die. It never hurt me. It instead empowered me to be a better person and to be a better environmentalist. But it did make me feel uncomfortable, because that's what learning is about, is that you have to be uncomfortable sometimes to learn these subjects and say, oh well, I kind of do contribute to the system. At the same time, I'm not trying to place so much individual blame on someone, but rather telling them like, we all have internal shame, but let's turn that shame into accountability, most specifically looking at these systems and these industries that are known to pollute and are profiting off of our bodies.
So you touched on something that I find really interesting in the climate movement as a whole, and that's the balance in advocacy between getting people excited about something and scaring people and making people feel guilty about something. And both of them are very strong approaches. I'm curious, on Queer Brown Vegan, when you think about these two different areas, how do you approach both of them, trying to get people excited about joining the movement and also putting some guilt and fear into their minds?
Yeah, I think that one way to think about this, like binary thinking, like I've been trying to challenge myself out of it, but I have always told my community that I try to be very realistic in terms of injustices. I personally shared my story about what I grew up with and like why this made me passionate. And sometimes I do get angry about these issues because they really hit close to home, and that's my community, that's my parents, that's my loved ones. And so in trying to kind of balance the both positive and like the doom and gloom, is that I tell people to really take the time to validate each and every of your emotions, because that's what really is going to sustainably love yourself in the long term. And in order to really practice sustainable activism, I tell people, here are these different issues that I always present on a daily basis. Do I expect everyone to know everything? Absolutely not. What I expect to you, at least minimum, is that at least you can say, here are a few things I'm very passionate about, and here are some things that I really want to do long term, like what is these existing systems. And so in trying to shift away from this like individual blame, I really tried to kind of present in a more global concept of like, here are these systems and these people in power that necessarily have been upholding oppressive and racist structures that we really do need to hold accountable, rather than fighting ourselves of who's using a bamboo toothbrush and not. Like these are some of the things that we really want to do. Like, yes, maybe we can have that bamboo conversation like for fun, in some way. And so I tell people not to constantly feed themselves into reading these news. And my content presents itself 50% education, 50% lifestyle, where we explore a lot of fun concepts, make sustainability fun, make environmentalism interesting. The other half is, here are some reality things that we do need to talk about it, because we really cannot ignore racism. We cannot ignore these extractive systems that have hurt people of color, because when you do that, you're hurting me as a person of color that grew up in a community like this. And it's not controversial to advocate for human rights. It costs $0 here in the West. You don't need to be a human rights expert to know that you care about a person's well-being. It's a human right that everyone has access to clean air, water, and soil. It doesn't matter who you are, how you grew up. Like everyone deserves it. It should not depend on your economic status, unfortunately. And so, in trying to balance that, I would say that my community is people that are really willing to learn with me. And I think that is what really holds them to ground, is that sometimes they can share laughs and sometimes they can share sadness and scare. But I think the validation that I give them in their emotions to say, hey, I'm going through this too, kind of allows them to be like, okay, I'm not alone in this. And so that kind of allows them to build a community online.
Absolutely. There is a short story that I'll tell you about that power of one person being able to take something that you say and bringing it to such a large scale. When um, I'm a musician, and so when we do shows, people come up to us and say, I love the music. And sometimes they come up to me and say, I love the sustainability work you're doing. A young woman from Indiana came up to us after a show and said, I saw your video that you posted about using bioplastics on the road and the differences between bioplastics and traditional plastics as single use. And she said that she went back to her school and started a petition at her school to remove all single-use plastic from the lunchroom. And within a month, all single-use plastic in the lunchroom was gone. And now she's taking it to the district level. So there is so much power in one individual hearing one thing. So even if, people who are listening, even if you see social media posts out there that don't have a lot of likes, think about how it can affect you and what you can pull out of it, because one person's actions can end up affecting an entire school district and then an entire city and an entire state. So there really is so much power in what you're saying. Everyone absolutely must go check out your platform. It is incredible. Queer Brown Vegan is amazing, and the videos are really exciting and also informational. And I really like that you describe yourself as an educator, because we need more different forms of educators out there. Thank you so, so much for taking the time today. I so appreciate it. It was amazing to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much again, Adam, for having me. I truly appreciate it.